The night my parents announced my husband's salary at the dinner table, out loud in front of 11 people, Marcus didn't say a word. He set down his fork. He folded his napkin. He looked at me once very quickly, and then he looked at his hands. I have replayed that moment 10,000 times since then. The way the table went quiet. The way my mother smiled like she'd just said something helpful. The way my father kept eating. What they didn't know was that by that same time the following year, Marcus would be named Educator of the Year for the entire state of Georgia, that his students would hold a rally in front of my parents' neighborhood, that a local news segment would air his story in front of 340,000 viewers, and that my parents' names would be in the comments of every single one. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I don't regret a single thing. Not the letter I wrote, not the school board meeting, not any of it. But to understand why that dinner destroyed something in me permanently, I need to take you back about 14 months. Because this didn't start with a dinner party. It started the day I introduced Marcus to my family for the very first time. My name is Claudette Reeves Okafor. I'm 34 years old, and I grew up in Dunwoody, Georgia, in a house that my father, Gerald Reeves, liked to refer to as earned. Gerald is a commercial real estate developer. Reeves Capital Partners offices on Peachtree Road. My mother, Patricia Reeves, sits on 3 nonprofit boards, runs a wine club, and has never held a salaried position in her life. She has never needed to. I say all of this not to explain them, but to explain the air I grew up breathing. In my parents' world, worth is a number. It is the square footage of your home on Zillow. It is your firm's ranking. It is the school your children attend. It is never, ever something you measure in the faces of 9th graders who learned to love reading because you stayed late every Tuesday. I met Marcus Okafor in 2019 at a mutual friend's birthday party in Decatur. He was 31, tall, quiet in that specific way that means someone is listening rather than just waiting to talk. He taught 9th grade English and creative writing at Riverside Academy, a Title I school in Southwest Atlanta. He drove a 2016 Honda Accord. He read James Baldwin on the weekends. He made me laugh harder than any person I had ever met in my life. I knew within 6 months that I was going to marry this man. I also knew, in a way I tried very hard to ignore, that my parents were going to be a problem. The first introduction was Thanksgiving 2020, late because of the pandemic. We drove to my parents' home in Dunwoody, a 6-bedroom colonial on Manhasset Drive that my father had purchased in 2003 for $890,000. Marcus brought wine. He shook my father's hand firmly, looked my mother in the eye, complimented the house genuinely. My father asked him within 4 minutes what he did for a living. When Marcus said he taught high school English, my father said, "Oh, just that," a single syllable carrying the full weight of a verdict. My mother pivoted immediately to asking about his family's background. His parents were Nigerian immigrants who had settled in Columbus, Ohio. His father was a civil engineer. His mother had been a registered nurse for 30 years. My mother said, "Oh, how lovely," in a voice that sounded like a door closing. I told myself they just needed time. I told myself this for 2 more years. Marcus and I married in April 2022. A small ceremony in Piedmont Park, 37 guests, exactly what we both wanted. My parents attended. They smiled in the photos. My mother cried during the vows. I thought, foolishly, hopefully, that it meant something had shifted. It hadn't. The comments started small. My mother asking over the phone, "Is Marcus still at that school?" The way my father would ask Marcus about career plans with a tone that implied teaching was a layover, not a destination. Family dinners where Marcus would be seated and then essentially talked around for 2 hours, the conversation curving past him like a river around a rock. Marcus never complained, not once. He would come home from those dinners and pour himself a glass of water and stand at the kitchen window for a while and then turn around and say, "Your cousin Brianna is interesting," or "Your dad makes a good rack of lamb," and I would look at him and think about how much grace it took to be that person, to be perpetually minimized by people with more money and less wisdom, and choose every single time not to let it make you small. I should have said something sooner, I know that. I sit with it. The fracture point, the moment the hairline crack became something structural, happened on a Saturday in September 2023. My parents threw what they called a casual dinner for their friends from the Piedmont Club. 12 people total. Lobster bisque, a caterer, Gerald in his weekend blazer. Marcus had just come off a brutal week. He had stayed until 6 p.m. every night working with a student named Devin, a 15-year-old who had stopped speaking in class after a difficult situation at home. Marcus had spent the week just being present, patient, bringing Devin books he thought might reach him. On the Friday before this dinner, Devin had read aloud for the first time in 3 months. Marcus had called me on the drive home, and his voice sounded like a person who had just witnessed something sacred. He walked into my parents' dinner that Saturday with good faith and quiet pride, and all of that still sitting in his chest. My father waited until the main course. His friend, Robert Callahan, partner at Callahan Dunmore Financial, was talking about his son's first-year salary at Goldman Sachs. The table was doing that thing wealthy dinner tables do, where everyone lists credentials and numbers in the guise of making conversation. And then my father said it. Well, Marcus here is a teacher. A pause, a small smile. Public school. So we're looking at, what is it now, Marcus? 53,000 a year? He said the number out loud. At the table, in front of 11 people he had invited specifically to impress. The table didn't exactly go silent. It went performatively polite, which is worse. Robert Callahan's wife made a noise that was almost sympathy. Someone said, "Oh, teaching is so important." My mother smiled and topped off her wine. Marcus said very quietly, 58.5 actually. And then he asked Robert Callahan what he thought of the new mixed-use development going up near Pond City Market. He redirected the conversation. He saved everyone from the moment my father had created. He did it smoothly, with zero self-pity. I sat there and felt something break open in my chest. On the drive home, I asked Marcus if he was okay. He said, "I'm fine, Claudette." He said it gently. He wasn't lying. He was genuinely more okay than I was, but I wasn't fine. I was sitting in the passenger seat thinking about Devin reading aloud for the first time in 3 months, about the 47 students Marcus had on his roster that semester, about the way he had described their faces when a sentence finally clicked, about what it meant that my father had reduced all of that to a number that he could use to make himself feel larger in front of his country club friends. I thought, I have been too patient. I have been patient for 3 years and mistaken that patience for grace, when really it was just avoidance. I didn't say anything that night. But I started writing things down, dates, comments, incidents. I don't know exactly when it became a document, but it did. I want you to remember what I just told you, that Marcus redirected the conversation and protected everyone from my father's cruelty, because it matters for what comes next. The person who was most determined to do something about this was never Marcus. It was the people around him who were paying attention. The shift began in October 2023, 22 days after that dinner, at a school event I almost didn't attend. Riverside Academy held their fall literacy showcase that year in the school's gymnasium. Student readings, short films, a display of the creative writing portfolios his 9th graders had produced. I went because Marcus mentioned it casually, the way he mentions most things he's proud of, which is to say barely. He said, "You don't have to come, it's just the kids' reading showcase," and I said I would be there. I arrived at 6:15 p.m. on a Thursday to a school gymnasium packed with parents, siblings, grandparents, and community members. There were roughly 200 people in folding chairs. A student named Aaliyah Williams read a poem about her grandmother's immigration from Haiti that made the woman behind me cry. A boy named Jordan Park read the first chapter of a novel he had started writing at 13. A girl named Simone Tran read an essay about learning to love her own name. At the end, Marcus's department chair, a woman named Dr. Felicia Bryant, 28 years in education, stood up and said that in her career she had known perhaps 4 teachers with the specific gift of making students believe their own voice was worth using. She said Marcus was one of them. 200 people stood up, not politely, loudly. I stood in that gymnasium surrounded by the families of his students, and I thought about my father saying 53,000 while smiling at Robert Callahan, and something in me became very, very clear. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. What I felt that night was not anger exactly. It was something colder and more purposeful. It was the feeling of knowing what to do. I emailed Dr. Felicia Bryant the next morning. I introduced myself as Marcus's wife, thanked her for her words, and asked if she'd be open to a conversation about the school's community engagement programs. She called me within the hour. Over the next 8 weeks, Felicia and I talked 6 times. I learned that Riverside Academy had been nominated twice for the National Association for the Education of Young Children Outstanding Program Award, but lacked the community visibility and donor engagement to push the nomination through. I learned that Marcus had been informally recommended for Georgia's Educator of the Year award by 3 separate colleagues, but that the submission required letters from community stakeholders, parents, local leaders, business owners, and nobody had organized the effort. I am, professionally, a communications director for a mid-sized nonprofit. Organizing stakeholder letters is essentially what I do for a living. I started making calls. The first call was to Diana Osei, parent of a Riverside Academy sophomore and president of the school's parent council. Diana had been in that gymnasium. She remembered the showcase. When I explained what I was thinking, she said, "Honey, I have been waiting for someone to organize this for 2 years." Diana gave me 11 more names. Those 11 names gave me 26 more. By December 2023, I had coordinated a letter-writing effort involving 43 community members, parents, former students, local business owners, 2 church pastors, and a city council member from District 4. Letters went to the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, the State Educator of the Year Selection Committee, and the local school board. I want you to remember this detail because it matters. Marcus had absolutely no idea any of this was happening, none. He thought I was just helping with some school stuff. He's going to tell me for the rest of my life that I should have told him sooner. He's right. I didn't, because I was afraid he would tell me to stop. He's too gracious for his own good. If something about this story is hitting close to home, if you're watching this and thinking about someone in your life whose value gets measured by the wrong instrument, by people who can't see past their own definitions of success, drop the word "seen" in the comments, because I read them, and that's exactly what this is about. The Georgia Educator of the Year selection process runs from January through April. The preliminary notification, a letter from the Georgia Department of Education, arrived at Riverside Academy on February 14, 2024, Valentine's Day. I found out from Felicia, who called me screaming quietly in what I can only describe as a professional whisper scream. Marcus had been selected as one of 10 finalists from the Metro Atlanta region. The final announcement would come in April. I held on to this information for 3 days before I told him. I'm not proud of that, but I wanted to have the whole picture first, because I was planning something beyond the award itself, and I needed a few more pieces in place. Because here is what I had also been quietly doing, separate from the award effort. In January 2024, I reached out to a journalist named Kevin Park at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who covers education. I'd seen his work, a 4-part series on under-resourced schools in Fulton County that was nuanced, angry in the right places, and rigorously reported. I sent him a 1-paragraph email with the subject line, "A story about what we tell teachers their work is worth." He responded in 40 minutes. Kevin and I spoke off the record 3 times over February. I was careful. I wasn't shopping a grievance piece. I was pointing him toward a real story about a real educator whose impact was quantifiable and documented, whose community had mobilized in ways that were newsworthy, and whose story raised legitimate questions about how society values the teaching profession. Kevin started his own reporting. He interviewed Diana Osei. He interviewed Dr. Felicia Bryant. He interviewed 6 of Marcus's former students, now in 11th and 12th grade, who talked about him with a specificity that I later read in the draft and had to stop and put my phone down for a moment. He also, in the process of his reporting, asked me about my family's perspective on Marcus's career. I told him, carefully and truthfully, that my parents had struggled to understand the value of what Marcus did. I did not name them. I did not manufacture drama. I gave Kevin the honest shape of a dynamic that was common, not personal, the way people with traditional measurements of success often fail to account for impact that can't be monetized. Kevin included a few lines about it in the article. Contextual, not accusatory, just true. The AJC article published on March 28, 2024. Under the headline, "He Stayed Late Every Tuesday, How One Atlanta Teacher is Redefining What a Great Education Looks Like." It ran in the print edition and online. It included photos taken by a staff photographer at Riverside Academy. It included a quote from Devon, now a sophomore, now thriving with his mother's permission, about what it meant to have a teacher who saw him when he felt invisible. Within 6 hours, it had been shared 40,200 times on Facebook. I sent my parents a link to the article at 8 a.m. that morning. No message, just the link. My mother called me at 9:14 a.m. I didn't answer. My father called at 11:02 a.m. I didn't answer. I was at Riverside Academy that morning helping set up for an assembly. The school had organized a surprise recognition for Marcus. The students and staff had made a banner. The gym was decorated. 240 students who had been coached to be quiet for exactly 17 minutes filed into their seats without a sound. Marcus was brought in under the pretense of a scheduling issue in the gym. He walked through the door in his regular clothes, dark pants, the green sweater he's had since 2018, his reading glasses pushed up on his head, and then he saw the banner, and then he saw his students, and then he saw me standing in the back of the room with Diana and Felicia, and his face did something I do not have the words to describe accurately. I'm going to try anyway. It looked like someone who had spent years carrying something heavy suddenly being told he could put it down. The students stood and clapped for 90 seconds straight. Devin stood up on his chair. I need you to understand that I had planned a lot of things in the preceding 5 months. I had organized, coordinated, communicated, and strategized, and none of it, not one single piece of it, prepared me for the sight of my husband in that gymnasium. I cried for about 45 seconds in the back of the room, and then I collected myself. Because there was still a lot of day left, my parents arrived at our home that evening at 6:30 p.m., unannounced. I saw my father's black Cadillac Escalade, 2023, purchased from Jim Ellis on Peachtree, pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. I had been expecting this. I opened the door before they knocked. My mother started to speak immediately. She said, "Claudette, I want to explain." The article made it sound like. I said, "Come in." Marcus was in the living room. He had read the article by then. He had also, that afternoon, received the preliminary notification from the Georgia Department of Education confirming he was a finalist for Educator of the Year. He knew my parents were coming. He'd asked me, calmly, if I wanted him to step out. I had said no. My parents sat on the couch. Marcus and I sat across from them. I had a folder on the coffee table. Inside the folder were printed copies of 7 emails, 1 voicemail transcript, and a handwritten note my mother had sent Marcus's principal 18 months prior, a letter she had written to express concerns about Riverside Academy's fit for a family member, which his principal had flagged and shared with me because she thought I should know. My mother had not told me she had written that letter. I didn't open the folder immediately. I let my father begin. He said he thought the article had taken some things out of context. He said the dinner had been a joke. He said Marcus knew he respected him. He said all the things people say when they have been caught being exactly who they are and need to renegotiate the terms. Then I opened the folder. I placed the voicemail transcript first. It was a message my father had left for my uncle in October 2022, which my uncle had forwarded to me after the dinner incident, because he was disgusted by it. In the voicemail, my father said, and I'm quoting from a printed transcript, that Marcus was a nice enough man, but that he didn't understand why Claudette was settling. My mother looked at the paper. She looked at my father. She said, "Gerald." I placed the emails next, 3 separate emails from my mother to her friend Linda Hargrove between 2022 and 2023, in which she referred to Marcus as that teacher, expressed worry about what kind of future Claudette was walking into, and once wrote that she had hoped I would find someone more established. I placed the letter to the principal last. My father's face went through 4 distinct expressions in approximately 90 seconds. My mother began crying, but quietly, in the way she cries when she has been caught, rather than when she is genuinely sorry. "I know the difference by now," she said. "I was just worried about you." I said, "I know you believe that." My father said, "Claudette, this isn't..." I said, "I'm not finished." I told them, without raising my voice, the following things: that Marcus had been nominated for Georgia Educator of the Year, that 43 members of his community had written letters on his behalf, that a journalist at the AJC had independently decided his story was worth reporting, that 400,000 people had read or shared that story in the first 24 hours, that his student Devin, a child who had stopped speaking in class, was reading again out loud in front of people because my husband had shown up every single Tuesday without being asked to and without being paid extra to and without telling anyone about it, and that none of those things appeared in a salary figure. Then I said, "I needed you to know that what you did at that dinner was not a joke. It was a pattern. And I have been complicit in the pattern by not naming it sooner. That ends now." My mother was still crying. My father was looking at his hands. Marcus, and this is the part that still undoes me a little when I think about it, Marcus said quietly to my parents, "I never needed you to think I was successful. I just wanted you to see that your daughter chose well." The room was very quiet after that. My father looked up. I watched something in his face shift, not collapse, not transform, just shift. Like a piece of furniture moved 2 inches. He said after a long moment, "I owe you an apology." He said it to Marcus, not to me. It was a start, not an ending. A start that was 14 months ago now. Marcus was named Georgia Educator of the Year on April 29, 2024 at a ceremony in Macon. The award includes a $10,000 grant for classroom use and a feature in the state's education newsletter. His school held a second celebration, bigger than the first, with the local news present. Channel 2 Action News ran a 3-minute segment. The YouTube clip has 340,000 views as of last week. My parents watched the ceremony. They were invited. I want to be clear about that. I invited them. Not because the wound was healed, but because the alternative was raising walls that would only get harder to take down. My father shook Marcus's hand after the ceremony and held on for an extra moment. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. My mother has sent Marcus 2 cards since then. One for his birthday in July, one at Christmas. They are not elaborate. They say things like, "We are proud of you." I have watched Marcus read them in the kitchen and not quite know what to do with them, which seems right to me. You don't undo 3 years with a Hallmark card, but you start somewhere. I want to be honest about what has been hard, because I promised myself this story would be real. There are dinners I still don't attend. There are phone calls I cut short. There is a version of closeness with my parents that I have quietly stopped trying to rebuild to its original form, not out of anger, but out of accuracy. I know them differently now. That knowledge takes up space. There is also the knowledge of my own delay. I stayed quiet at dinners for years because I told myself it was peacekeeping. Looking back, it was something smaller than that. It was self-protection. I didn't want to fight the battle. Marcus paid the price for that, quietly and without complaint, and that is something I will carry for a while. He tells me I'm being too hard on myself. He's probably right. He's usually right about things like that. What I didn't expect in all of this was how many people showed up. Diane Osei, who I had never met before October 2023, texted me on the morning of the ceremony and said we did this together. Kevin Park sent a note after the story went wide, saying it was one of the pieces he was most proud of. Dr. Felicia Bryant hugged me at the ceremony for a long time without saying anything. That community, those 43 letter writers, those students' families, those people who had watched Marcus show up for their children year after year, they didn't know they were answering my parents' cruelty. They were just telling the truth. But the truth, when it's organized and visible, can do a lot. I think about something Marcus said to me once, early in our relationship, when I was worrying about whether my family would ever come around. He said, "Claudette, I don't need their approval, but I'd like their respect. Those are different things." He understood even then the difference between needing to be validated and being willing to ask for basic dignity. I think that's part of what made him such a good teacher. He had already done the work of knowing who he was. I'm still learning how to do that. Some mornings I still wake up and replay that dinner table. The smell of the lobster bisque, my father's smug half smile, the sound of that number said out loud like it was a punchline. I replay it, and then I replay Devin standing on his chair in a school gymnasium, and Marcus's face when he came through that door, and 300 people on their feet. Those two things happened in the same universe, the same life. And somehow the second one grew directly from the first. If you're watching this and you're living some version of the dinner table right now, if you're with someone whose worth is being measured by instruments that can't possibly capture it, or if you are that person, I want you to know the people who can see it clearly are already around you. You may just need to organize them. The truth doesn't need anyone's permission. It just needs people willing to say it out loud. If this story meant something to you, not just as something to watch, but as something you needed to hear today, share it with someone who needs it. You probably already know who that is. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, I'll be here